Hey, my name is Eric Knutson. Thank you for watching another one of our real-time time studies. And this video is going to be focusing on our bump bar asset. We had a lot of people whenever we introduced our version 2.0 rack at FenceTech in 2023 in Oklahoma City. A lot of people were asking us, well, how do we use the bump bar? Because the bump bar makes it to where you can build like you do in the field. You can bump it. You can literally bump it. And it doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't bounce off, doesn't have any, you haven't taken a piece of wood and made a jig across the top to bump. It just is part of the rack. You're not moving it, you're not resetting it. Once you start your build, it stays. And it moves with the rack. So if you go to lower the setting for this, it just moves with it. You move it in and out, it moves with it. And it always stays to the increment that you've set based on the reveal that the software has told you to do. Now, the software has told you to do that reveal because that's what the customer has asked for, or that's what your standard is. It's up to you. But the problem that the industry runs into whenever they're site building is when they have hips and valleys, they want to be able to install the boards along those hips and valleys and then come back with a string line or something and be able to cut it so that they get some kind of a nice smooth or stepped system. The problem is you got a tip on it. You can't cut it off. So when you're on site, oftentimes guys will flip it over, mark it, flip it back, mark it and cut it, and then flip it back and install it. But with the build rack, the beauty of this is you've got the bump bar for the tip, but the tail end of the board can hang down to make that odd-shaped panel to transition through those hips and valleys. Now, in this video here, if you click on it, I show how I go from this fence system looking like this to it looking like this using the settings within the software. Now, we're going to build with it looking like that. And we're going to build and do our time study on panel number 11 in this system. And why number 11? Well, all the other time studies have the same panel number, so we're doing apples to apples across the different styles that we're doing. We've done a solid panel with 2 rails, 2 trim, and a cap. We've done a vertical lattice with 3 rails, 3 trim, and a cap. And then we added horizontal lattice to that. So this is our 4th video in a series, and as we go on, we'll go into doing board on board, we'll do good neighbor, we'll do some other styles with the system. Now in the future, we will be doing arches also, and those arches will dynamically adjust to the relative spacing and the elevation change. So watch for that. Okay, so the first thing in the time study, I brought in my material already. I'm going to add the time for that right here. I'm not going to use my dust collection. It's too noisy, but I do have dust collection in this production pod. This is the Fence Genius production pod. The very first thing I need to do is I need to go to the pre-manufacturing workflow. We're going to produce, this is panel 11 right here, just so we know. And before we go to the pre-manufacturing workflow, let's take a quick look at, we can see how many boards, and we can see that it desires to have rips on both ends. And I will reiterate that. Fence Genius always hopes that people will do rips on both ends. That way you can use 2 boards that have a slight defective end and rip it. It just gives more opportunities to use slight defects. But if we go to the bill of materials and we take a look at this panel, you don't need to go look at this, but I just want to point out what's in the bill of materials. But if I go to panel number 11 here, and you can see the rails and the trim, and then you can see the actual fence boards that are in the fence panel, including 14 of them, plus 1 in the center, 15, plus then you have rips of 4 inches. Approximately. Now, it's 4.078, so if you had automation, yeah, you could hit that. But we're just gonna use that as just the starter board size, just because I looked at it and I've seen it. Now let's go back to get started on the pre-manufacturing, but let's just go to run number 3, panel number 11. That's the one that we're building in this. So let's start the clock now and we will get going on it. So I've got my first rail. It's my top rail. I am going to put it down on the left-hand side of the saw. I'm going to slide it and I'm going to put this at the -7 and it's 0 on the back. And I am going to cut and I'm going to label this T for top. Now I'm going to slide it to the right. I'm going to say next. And I've got to set this saw at -7. Again, the reason we've got 2 saws is because sometimes that helps if you've got repeated angles. And I'm going to mark it at the 92 9/16. And again, my marking is always on this inside edge. So that's very important. And I look down the left side of the blade at the mark. I cut it. I can see that this is green. 2 of 2, that means it's done. I will set it in the rack. And then I will say next, and now I'm into my trim. Now when I'm doing trim, as soon as I see a good face, I face it up. Because that's the outside face. So this did not change color, this -7. So I know that I'm okay, and I've got a piece of defect here. I'm going to cut it off. Now with trim, you always put your hand on it like this. You roll it, and you put, for this, T for top, then you lay it back down. The reason I put my hand on it and grab it and roll it is so that I don't accidentally let it go. Because you don't want to accidentally flip it. You just want to roll it and mark it. So now I go next, and if I was audibly speaking that, it would be faster. 92 9/16, of course. So I get my 92 9/16. Again, on the right saw, it's all black, so I don't need to change any settings. Generally, these things take about 1 minute and 15 seconds per rail or per piece of trim. So I went to the next, I'm going to the bottom rail now. It's asked me to change to 8.75, -8.75. Again, it's not the easiest thing to get a 1/4 of a degree on these, but anyway, you can do it. So let's slide it over. First thing, we cut it. We mark B for bottom. And we slide it. Now we say next. This one, of course, also changed. And again, there's sometimes it's really worth having 2 saws. Sometimes it's not. But you don't need to use both saws. You can just tell it you're only using one. So 92 15/16. So this is different because it is going down a steeper slope than the top rail is, and with the smoothing. So I will look down, cut it. I'm done with this. I see the green, it means I'm done. Put it aside. I've got the B on it. I say next, and now I'm into the trim. So I see a good side, I'm just going to leave it up. I'm just going to cut it because it didn't turn orange. Yeah, I mean your trim's not going to change angles. So this is B for bottom. I slide it. I say next. I hook my tape on that corner. And I go 92 15/16 again. Now, if I had a stop, I could set the stop, but I don't. certainly that you can make it faster if you put in a stop. Okay, so that right there is our time for cutting the rails and trim. It's up here now. Now we are going to go into the actual build. So let's go to the pre-assembled panels tab. Now, if we were building, this whole fence system, we would have just cut 4 fence panels worth of parts and they would be here. So it'd be much more efficient. But let's go to our run number 3 and our panel number 11. Okay, so you can see in the screen here that it tells us we have a 6-inch offset for our bump bar. It also tells us our dimensions, and it's right here in this screen. So I'm going to go ahead and set my dimensions. I've already set it at 6 for the reveal. So 68 and 5/16, 13, oh, this one's not being used. So 13 and 7/16 on the bottom. Over here, 57 and 3/8. And then the bottom on this side is 0. And it's still set at 0 from the last time we used it. And now we need to move it to 83 and 3/8. So 83 and 3/8. Okay, so we've set our settings for the clamps. Now we put in the rails. If you remember from the other videos, the label is always to the left and facing you when it's the rails. So this is the bottom. I'm going to move it tight to the right, and I'm going to put the clamp down on it. Okay, now I will do the top rail. Again, label facing me to the left. Now I will set my clamp. So that's clamped in, it's tight to the right. Okay. All right. So we're set. So now we can start building. The very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at my fence boards. And I want to try to find, if I can, a fence board that's got a defective corner, if at all possible. I'd really like to be able to rip off a defective corner. Now, those ones are all good. So I know most people don't do this, and I know this is adding to my time, but to me it's important. I like to increase the quality of my panels by properly dealing with defects. All right. Oh, there's one. Oh, and there's the other one. Yeah, I had put it in there, but that just showed you I had to go through. I went through the whole stack, so that much extra time was added. Now, if I simply pull out my saw, I set it to the 4 inches, and I can run the defect. Okay, so as I said in other videos, I do my fence boards with staples. and I do my trim with round heads. Right tool, right place, right time. We got all the different nail guns over there. So I'm just going to bump against my bump bar, and I'm going to hang it down, and I can just start now. Okay, so this one is my defect for the end rip. So now as I go, I can just bump, bump. Whoop. Now you'll probably be a lot faster at this than I am, and that's understandable because guys that are building in the field are generally going to be faster. But that's good. That means that you'll be done with it sooner than I am. A lot of guys like to go all across the top first and then do the bottom. That's fine too. You can do it however you want. Whatever your method is. Point is, you're bumping the bump bar. You're not having to guess. You're not having to move a temporary jig. You're just moving right along with it. All right. Now if you were doing a board on board, you would have, there's another mechanism for spacing. Okay, so I get to my laser here, and this laser is set to my 5.5, so I'll know what my end reveal is, but I'm also able to just simply go 16, measure 16, and I can tell that based on this, I don't have a super narrow rip at the end. I can also tell based on this how far out of plumb I am. So I'm actually nice and straight, so I really don't have to do anything. I can just roll right on in. Okay, so now I need to do my final rip. I'll go 4 5/8. Yep, 4 5/8. Come out, lock it, set it. It's a whole lot easier to use this than that rip off. Whole lot easier to use that than a worm drive saw in the rain or the mud. And one thing that you do need to do is when you build out your pod, put the hose reel on the bottom. Okay, so there we go. There is the fence boards. Now I'm done with this. Now I want to do the trim. So I'm going to do the top first, just because I want to do it for the video. The T is to the left and up. So again, right tool, right place, right time. I'm using the round head. I bump it against the trim stop. I visually align it with the top of the rail as best I can, and put a couple nails in. I go to the other end, and it looks perfect. Whoop. Double fire. At least I have my tool right here to pull that out. Okay, now the bottom. Label to the left. I go against the trim stop. I align it with the top of the rail. I go to this end, I align it. All right, that's it. It's really, that part of it's done. Now, on the bottom, so the time study on that's done, the actual fabrication. I'm gonna add another 1.5 minutes for the amount of time it takes to take it out of the rack and bring it out and run a saw down this bottom. And what I'll do is I use a 2x4 as a spacer, and the offset of my saw blade is another 1.5 inches, so I have a 5-inch bottom reveal. And that way it's continuous throughout the system for the whole fence system. Anyway, this is what our bump bar can do. If you want to have a board-on-board system, we have a wider bar that you can do board-on-board. We also have spacing mechanisms to help you automatically space based on what width your panel is. Anyway, thank you for watching and happy fence building.